And yet we are able to save $22,000 on the regular operating budget. How are we able to do that? We have decreases in some of our spending areas. Tuition shows a decrease of $135,000, which is a reduction in tuition paid to other schools. Capital outlay, $55,000 lower. Reduction in purchases of capital items. Those are things that cost over $2,000 each. Improvement of instruction and staff development, a reduction of $34,000 as we focus more on internal resources again. Transportation represents a reduction of almost $100,000 from consolidation of bus routes, elimination of late busing, and courtesy busing. How are our budget dollars spent? This pie is usually cut up about the same way from one year to the next. Payroll and benefits, the largest portion, 71.3%. All of the other areas, which I hope you can read, none of them exceed 7.6%. They're all on the small side. One thing of note, the pie is smaller than last year, just as last year's pie was smaller than the year before because we're spending less. Within those budget dollars, we break them down into discretionary and non-discretionary. Non-discretionary being those of a contractual nature. That accounts for 91.4% of our budget dollars this year. It's an increase over last year and an increase over the year before. So we have more non-discretionary spending and less discretionary spending. And the pie is smaller. Within the area of non-discretionary spending, the pie looks the same, pretty much the slices as they have in previous years, because the breakdown is about the same. But again, it's smaller than in previous years, notably in school operations, operations and maintenance, and staff development and improvement of instruction. Those areas in particular took larger hits. How do our students benefit from our spending, our budget spending? The total projected spending per student is $13,799. Again, it breaks down approximately the same way. Again, this is a lower number than last year. Student support and classroom instruction together comprise 71.7% of our spending on students. Back to numbers. Sources of revenue. General fund revenues, in the middle, $44,57,500. The number you've seen before is our regular operating budget number. It reflects a decrease of 0.05%. Our revenue will come from our local tax levy of $38.8 million. You'll see at the top of the 2011 and 12 column. General fund revenue, state aid revenue, miscellaneous revenues. In addition, down below we'll have basically dollars that go in and out. Although it's increased spending, it's not an increased tax impact. When you see the ballot, we will be voting on an increased tax levy of $38.8 million. That represents an increase of 0.48%. The state allows a 2% cap. We're not going to do that to our taxpayers this year. We're trying to be very respectful of their ability to pay and keep it down. Last year the cap was 4%. Now we're down to 2%, but we're putting up 0.48%. Another way to look at this, on this chart, on the right at the bottom, you see that $44,057,000 again, the regular operating budget number. Compare that to 2 years ago, before we had big cuts in state aid. Our total revenues then were $45,859,000. We now have about a 4% drop compared to 2 years ago. Now we're getting $38.8 in the local tax levy, the amount to be voted on. 2 years ago we got $37.6. 2 years ago the local tax levy accounted for 82% of our budget, of our total revenues. Now the local tax levy accounts for 88%. 2 years ago state aid was $5.4 million. Covered almost 12% of our total revenues. Now it's going to be $3,598,000, and that's a gross number. We actually have to get some money back to the state, so we'll never actually receive that full 3.5. We'll get more like 3.4. Compared to 2 years ago, that's a loss of $2 million. If we had that $2 million from the state, we could lower our local tax levy by $2 million. And then it would be less than 80% coming from local taxpayers. The effect of state aid on property taxes. A historical perspective. If you go back 13 years, the tax levy accounted for $20,500,000, and the state aid number accounted for $5.6 million. Far more than we're getting now. Back then, the state aid constituted 21.5% of that combined tax levy and state aid total. Fast forward to now, to our next budget. State aid at $3.5 million will constitute 7.6% of our total tax levy and state aid. The difference coming from the local taxpayers. This slide shows the difference in tax rates between this year's, next year's budget and this year's by municipality. It's meant to highlight the differences between these tax rates in the 2 years. You'll see these numbers again in subsequent pages. The components of the tax rate calculation shows our regional allocation as determined by municipal assessed values in conjunction with the proportion of a municipality's student population attending grades 9 to 12 versus K to 8. That allocation is applied to the total calendar tax needs in the next column, 41 million, to determine the community's tax needs. Divided by municipal assessed values in the next column, you get the tax rate, the one you just saw on the last page. Applied to a home value at $500,000 in every community, you have the tax listed in the last column on the right. Our next sheet shows, again, the difference in the tax rates from one year to the next applied to a $500,000 home in our 5 communities, and shows the difference the change in tax rates will make this year. This is a different perspective. The annual cost per pupil in this slide is $13,925. That's for 1 year. That's the average in our school district. For 4 years, that would total a cost of $55,700 to educate a high school student for 4 years. It would take 18 years to reduce that if you were paying $3,000 a year, which would be the average tax on a regional home in the district. That is over all of our homes. That will perhaps, you will perhaps be better able to relate to this by looking at the next 5 slides, which show the same comparison for each municipality and also shows the average home value in each of our municipalities at the new tax rate to show what the tax would be. So that in Mendon Township,
I'm just keying for it.
Right.
You want me to go back?
Nah, you can stop here. In Washington Township, your average home value went down slightly. Your average tax rate, I believe, went up a bit. I don't have it. So you do have an increase over last year of $32 for the year. That's the increase. I apologize if we're going through this really fast. I apologize if we're not going through this fast enough. Perspective. This is our crystal ball look. We are in 2011 and 12 in this budget year. That's a minus 0.5 decrease in spending. You see on the far right. We're projecting, if we continue with 2% caps, if we hold state aid flat, and we'll still have a reduction in what we have in surplus in the future. But we would predict that for next year's budget, we would have an increase in the regular operating budget of 0.3%, even though we're allowed a 2% cap on the tax levy increase. And you can see as it changes as the years go on, the 2% cap on the tax levy increase. We welcome your support. Please remember to vote on April 27. The polling places are listed on the slide. And if you want to see the entire presentation, if this wasn't enough, go to www.wmrhsd.org. Questions?
I'm the board person in public.
Anybody? Excuse me, not anybody. Board person.
I know that we eliminated approximately 30 positions last year. Are we reinstating any of those positions?
We're going to take the increases in state aid and use them to decrease class size in the core areas, which means that we will probably be adding 2 teachers at each school in the areas of science, history, and English.
For a total of
4 teachers.
other board questions?
That's bring 2 students per school, and that's 3 subjects. How's that work?
2 teachers.
Oh, I'm sorry, 2 teachers per school, and that's 3 subjects. How's that
The
work?
preliminary requests that I've gotten have been 2 in science at Mendon, 1 in history, and 1 in English at Central.
Okay.
We still need to see what the student enrollments are in all of those areas. That's our preliminary proposal.
Jackie?
Yes.
Would you show us that the per pupil spending from last year to this year